A cold silence sits between ambition and reality, and you just walked right through it. Listen, there are moments in life where even the loudest systems in the world, power, authority, control, stop arguing with each other and start agreeing on one uncomfortable truth. Not because they care about you, but because what you're becoming is no longer something they can ignore. And before your mind runs to names like Pentagon or Putin, understand this clearly. This is not politics. This is symbolism. This is pressure. This is power reacting to discipline it can't predict. Because in the world of execution, even opposing forces agree on one thing. If your strategy is sharp enough, it becomes mandatory training for your future self. You ever notice how life doesn't warn you before it upgrades you? One day you're average scrolling, distracted, underestimated. Next day, life starts acting like you're in a simulation designed to test if you're serious or just pretending. Pressure increases, distractions multiply, doubt gets louder, and suddenly, your existence feels like it's under review, not by people, by reality itself. Most people break here. They think resistance means stop. They think pressure means wrong direction. They think silence means failure. But you don't. Because something inside you starts calculating. You stop reacting. You start strategizing. You stop explaining. You start building. And that's where the shift happens. Even the symbolic forces of life, order and chaos, discipline and comfort, fear and ambition, start aligning on one brutal truth. They don't care what you feel. They respond to what you execute. There are two types of people. The ones who wait for motivation, and the ones who become the reason motivation has to evolve. The first group gets consumed by noise. The second becomes the signal. And when you become the signal, everything recalibrates around you. Even your failures start acting like training. Even your setbacks start shaping you instead of breaking you. Even your silence becomes focus. Because your strategy is not just a plan. It is a system that refuses comfort. It is the version of you that says, I don't need to feel ready. I need to become undeniable. That's why consistency is dangerous. Because consistency is violent to chaos. It's offensive to distraction. It's unbearable to excuses. And it's terrifying to anything built on randomness. You don't defeat doubt by arguing with it. You defeat it by outliving it. By executing so consistently, it loses access to you. And then comes the real shift. You stop asking, can I do this? And you start saying, this is already happening. That's when life stops being a question and becomes the response. So when everything feels like it's against you, when silence gets heavier, when pressure rises, that is not your ending. That is your system activating. And in that moment, even chaos has to acknowledge one thing. You are no longer reacting to life. You are designing it. Something irreversible happens. People around you don't understand you the same way anymore. Not because you changed your clothes, not because you got louder, but because your patterns stopped matching the version of you they memorized. You move different, you think in silence, you act without announcing, and that alone creates distance. Not emotional distance, strategic distance. Because most people live inside reaction loops. Something happens, then they respond, then they feel, then they explain, then they repeat. But you break that loop. You start building before validation arrives. You execute before confidence shows up. You continue even when nothing around you confirms you should. That's where the real isolation begins. Not loneliness from absence of people, but loneliness from absence of equals. And this is where most people collapse. They mistake isolation for failure. They mistake quiet progress for nothing happening. They mistake invisibility for insignificance. But in reality, this is the phase where your structure is being reinforced. Because anything that lasts must be built where no one claps for it yet. No applause, no recognition, no proof from outside. Only repetition, only discipline, only execution when it makes zero emotional sense. And slowly, without warning, things begin to shift externally. Not dramatically at first. Subtle changes. Opportunities that used to ignore you start pausing. People who underestimated you start observing quietly. Situations that once broke you start feeling lighter. Not because the world changed, because your tolerance to chaos increased. That's the part they never explain. You don't win life by overpowering everything around you. You win by becoming unshakable inside it. And when you reach that stage, you stop needing constant proof. You stop needing reminders. You stop needing emotional fuel, because discipline replaces motivation as your default operating system. And now, listen carefully. This is the point of no return. Once your identity is built on execution, not emotion, you can't go back to being random. You can't go back to inconsistency without feeling it immediately. You can't pretend anymore. Because awareness has increased, and awareness makes excuses painful. So you start moving like someone who understands consequence, not fearfully, but precisely. Every action starts having weight. Every hour starts having value. Every distraction, now it gets even quieter. Because when you reach this level of internal structure, the world stops entertaining your excuses completely. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just stops responding to the old version of you. And that creates a strange tension. You start noticing it in small moments. Delays that used to frustrate you now feel irrelevant. Opinions that used to shake you now feel lightweight. Doubt that used to feel like truth now feels like background noise. This is what happens when your identity stops being flexible. You don't bend for every emotion anymore. You don't reshape yourself for every reaction. You stay aligned. And alignment is what most people never learn to tolerate. Because alignment removes chaos as an option. Now listen closely. This is where your strategy becomes something deeper than planning. It becomes identity compression, meaning you no longer separate what you think, what you say, and what you do. They start collapsing into one system, no contradictions, no delays, no emotional negotiations, just execution consistency. And that's when you become difficult to read, not mysterious in a performative way, but unreadable in a functional way. People try to predict your next move and fail, not because you're unpredictable, but because you're no longer random, you're structured, and structured people don't move based on impulse. They move based on internal law. That's why even setbacks stop landing the same way. Because once your system is stable, external disruption loses leverage. It can shake moments, but it can't rewrite direction. And this is where something interesting happens inside you. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop over-attaching to pain. You stop giving emotional meaning to every obstacle. Not because you became cold, but because you became accurate. You start seeing life for what it is, a sequence of inputs and responses. And your job is not to feel every input deeply. Your job is to respond correctly. That shift alone changes everything, because now your energy is no longer leaking into overthinking. It's being redirected into output. And output changes outcomes, not intention, not emotion, output. And slowly, Without announcing itself, your reality starts reflecting that, not as reward, but as consequence. Because life doesn't reward consistency, it reflects it. And once you understand that, you stop asking for signs. You become the sign. You stop waiting for confirmation. You become the confirmation. And even silence around you starts feeling different. Not empty, but loaded, like something is forming just beyond visibility. And that's where you are now. Not at the end of the story, but at the point where the story stops being written in theory and starts being written in action. And from here, everything becomes about pressure tolerance. Not the pressure that breaks you, the pressure that reveals you. Because there is a kind of pressure that doesn't destroy identity. It strips away everything that was never real in the first place. Excuses fall first, then hesitation, then emotional dependence, then the need for approval. What's left is not a better version of you. It's the real operating core. Unfiltered, unnegotiated, undistracted. And this version of you doesn't need inspiration to move. It moves because stillness becomes uncomfortable. That's the shift most people never reach. They think discipline is about forcing action. It's not. At a certain point, discipline becomes discomfort with inactivity. You don't try anymore. You correct. You adjust. You refine. Like a system that refuses to decay. And this is where your past self starts to feel distant. Not emotional.